Good afternoon to one and all present here. Next, we are going to have a captivating conversation about on culture, literature, and society. And the guest for our session will be Preeti Gill, Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, Dr. Pallavi Narayan, and which will be moderated by Dr. Payal Mehta. I will be introducing our guest. Preeti Gill is an independent literary agent who has more than 20 years of experience in the publishing industry as a commissioning editor and a rights director. She has traveled extensively in the northeast of India and written on the issues of conflict and women. She is the editor of Peripheral Center Voices from India's Northeast, as well as Bearing Witness, a report on the impact of conflict on women in Nagaland and Assam. Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, an educationist, author, and poet, teaches at the Center of English Studies at Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. She was recognized as an inspired teacher for the President of India's in Residence program at Rashtrapati Bhavan, New Delhi in June 2015. She has been largely interested in areas of literatures of margin, studies of violence, trauma, and women's studies. Her recent work has been on violence studies, engaging with discourses on the 1984 anti-Sikh carnage in Delhi. Next, we have Pallavi Narayan, who is an associate professor of practice in the Humanities and Language Division of the School of Arts and Sciences. Professor Narayan holds a PhD in literature from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and her research is focused on cities through the lens of fiction. She publishes across disciplines focused primarily on contemporary fiction and poetry, literary theory, urban architecture, museum studies, cultural studies, and the self and the other. I invite all of them, and the stage is yours, ma'am. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to the Comperer for the wonderful introduction of all the panelists today. As it is rightly said, that strength lies in differences and not in similarities. When we talk about culture, literature, and society, it is all about the differences which are there into it. And when we celebrate these differences, it becomes the society. So here we have Dr. Ishmeet Kaur Chaudhry, who is an educationalist, author, and poet, and who teaches at the Center for English Studies at Central University of Gujarat. She has worked a lot in the field of margins and marginals, and she has practical experience of exploring those fields. As it is rightly said that when we talk about the literature of margins, you cannot expect a structured thing over there, like opening, development, conclusion, or some defined formats like climax, anticlimax, or certain defined formats. But then too, their literature, their say, have many things to say. Let us hear it directly from the one who has actually worked in that field, who have experimented, and who have explored the least explored field. Over to you, Dr. Ishmeet Kaur.
Thank you, Payal, and very warm good afternoon to everybody. Ahmedabad right now is having a wonderful weather that is pretty unusual for many of us. We're going to talk here about literature, culture, and society. We've been talking about perhaps how literature mirrors society, but literature also shapes society. You know, it also shapes culture. Culture evolves with literature, and culture is never, stagnant. Culture keeps changing. Culture keeps evolving. Working in the field of margins, interestingly, we're talking about, when we talk about margins, the numbers is always less, or it's about, how certain set of communities or certain people are sidelined or marginalized, because there are dominant forces, and those dominant forces can be in various forms. Dominant forces can be in terms of agencies, it can be in terms of numbers, it can be in terms of religion, you know, in any form. The area is really, really wide, but owing to whatever little time we have, I would like to focus largely on literature. And what is it that kind of fascinated particularly me when I ventured into studying margins. So of course, the experiences of these marginalized communities is the core of these literatures. But something very interesting in terms of literature is the way they are writing. What is the form that they're using to write, right? So just to name a few marginalized communities, you know, perhaps the indigenous communities or the Dalits, or even women writing or writing from across different genders, you know, disability studies and things of these kinds, or minority discourses. So when we look at it, you know, there are various kinds of forms. But for example, if we look at novels, so we've always heard that, okay, novel has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, or there is a particular form which is followed, or poetry is of a particular kind, you know, a meter has to be honored, and, you know, there has to be, earlier it was like there has to be a rhyme scheme and things of that kind. But when the margins tend to write, you know, they do not kind of adopt these forms, but they create forms. And they create forms as per the suitability of their concerns. And therefore, what we see is that, you know, amongst margins, marginalized writings or writings, let me say not marginalized writings, I'm sorry, but it has to be writings coming from the margins, we see a lot of experimentation in terms of form. So, you know, I'll just explain it through example. One of these Australian Aboriginal women who could not write in English went to her daughter and said, why don't you write a story about my experiences? And so the daughter wrote her mother's story. Now that story that the daughter wrote is not a biography, right? Because it's been written by the daughter, and the daughter, every time the mother passed certain remarks, the daughter reacted in the book to her mother's remarks. And she put her remarks in italics. So does this become, you know, an autobiography, or does this become a biography? And if we try to neatly define this in terms of forms, whether this is biography or autobiography, it doesn't work. So a larger term came up which we know as life narratives or writings of the self. And when we see that too, there is huge experimentation because there are concerns of language. Now, every community has a different language, and if people are writing in English, then English is not sufficient to depict their cultural nuances because you can't translate every word. So one tends to see, if it is, for example, a Punjabi writing, one tends to see Punjabi words being used. So if it is, you know, a writing by an Australian Aborigine, maybe a Wajari woman, so she's putting the words of the Wajari language in there. And then, of course, the glossary is there for us to understand what we are reading. But these forms of writing are amazing, and they are extremely interesting. Now, these writings are also collaborative in nature, so a mother and a daughter are writing, right? 3 people of the community get together and then they write. So, you know, the individual identity of an author is not that very important here. So, you know, it's the community. So the voice is the voice of the community. So it's a collective voice of the community. It's a story of the community. And then, you know, their experiences of whatever, suffering, negation, maybe movement, attacks on them, whatever. It comes in there in those forms. But that individual idea is kind of lost. The idea of an individual author is not kind of, it's absolutely lost, because then it becomes the voice of the community. Moreover, these becomes representative texts. So they represent the community, and the moment they also represent, they become extremely resistant. So the first resistance is in adapting the form, a new form in itself. So you are resisting, you know, the whole idea of adapting a novel to write your experience. So the first resistance we see in terms of literature itself. And furthermore, you know, there is a critique that evolves of various agencies, maybe of how the government structures have worked, how the governments perhaps have ignored the proper development and felicitation, you know, and giving facilities to these marginalized communities. And they critique at several levels, you know, and they just don't critique others, they also evolve a criticism of their own selves. You know, they look at why they were, in a way, you know, why were they dominated? Why did they have to face this oppression, right? Where were they weak in their own sense, right? So this is where I'll put a halt, and we'll take other
We'll come back to you, Dr. Kaur. Now, as beautifully Dr. Ishmeet Kaur mentioned about how the literature of margins evolved, because as she truly said that English cannot be the language always for expressing somebody's culture, about societal change, and about other things. It reminds me of kaleidoscope. Whenever you look into it, every time there would be a different design, isn't it? That is all about culture, society, and literature. The instrument remains the same, but every time the design would be different. It is all about the relationship between culture, society, and literature. As it is truly narrated in our Bharatiya Sanskriti, or we call it Sanatan Dharma, that is mentioned, Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu, Shakti Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Nama. If we talk about women, in Indian perception, she has been worshipped as Shakti. And Shakti Sampradaya is also there along with other religions in India. And when the contradictory lies that the most downtrodden community in our country itself, or many a times who is treated as the secondary citizen, is also women. So here we wish to know, and we wish to hear it from an expert. She is Preeti Gill, who is an independent literary agent and who has published more than 20 years experience in the publishing industry, and she is associated with Kali and other institutions wherein she has tremendous experiences to share, which has evolved herself as well, and we would all ears to listen it from you, ma'am. What has changed in you, and what change have you observed through your journey in different institutions?
Thank you. That's very, very wide. But I think that what I like to believe is that I've had a life in books. So right from the beginning, from the time that you're a child and you start reading and you enjoy the stories that you're reading, from that time on till right now, I like to say I have a very peripatetic life. I'm traveling all the time, never still in one place, and everything has to do with books. So the fact that I joined publishing as a career was also extremely lucky in a manner, because that was exactly where I wanted to be.
And now it is 2 decades, ma'am.
Yeah, a long, long time. Much more than that. I don't like to admit it, but you can see the white hair, and so you know it's got to be longer. Yeah, so right from that time when I first started out in publishing, for me, books books spelled so many things. I mean, it was not just a story, it was not just information, it was not just a window which was opening into another world, into another culture, into somebody else's life. But it was also a way of connecting, of empathizing. And so a lot of the time, I was reading about things or places or people that I had no idea about. And through this book, I would learn and I would understand what was going on. And exactly what Ishmeet talked about right now, which is to do with the margins. Again, this was a lucky break for me that I was working at Kali for Women, which was India's first feminist publishing house. Again, I think it was started in '84. So it was also probably Asia's first women's publishing house. It started from this whole idea that in India, there was no publisher who was looking seriously at writing coming from women. Women academics and women writers from India often had to find a publisher outside of the country. And both Urvashi Butalia and Ritu Menon, who started Kali for Women, began it with this whole reason that women in India needed their own house where they could publish. So just like that earlier session, which was talking about women's writing, and they talked about Virginia Woolf and a room of one's own, you also needed a publishing house of your own, which understood where you were coming from, which understood what you were trying to say. And that often these things have not been discussed before, and these points of view or these perspectives have not been laid out in the public arena earlier, but it was time that all these things were talked about. So whether it was looking at, in those days, I remember in the 80s, bride burning, for example, was a huge thing. Dowry deaths were a big thing. So taking out books which looked at property rights, which looked at the woman as somebody who was not just a daughter or not just a daughter-in-law, but actually had her own wajud, had her own persona, and that there were things that that woman wanted to say and wanted to say strongly. Those were some of the things that we did publish at that time. A lot of the books, some of you may have heard of, especially people who've been teaching or who are students, Radha Kumar, for example, who wrote A History of Doing. It was a seminal book, a book that is still going on. It must be in its 35th edition or something by now. But those were the first times that people started to talk about these things. So when you had talking about, for example, the fact that women have so much wisdom when it comes to looking at seed collection or keeping seeds or looking at farming methods, things that they do at home, things that they have been brought up doing, but which are not part of mainstream knowledge. Those were the things that I think Kali put on the map. So, and I'm really glad that I worked there because like I think when we were talking earlier, I was saying that a lot of these things one thinks about. As a woman, all of these things are in your head, but you don't know that thousands of other women are thinking the same thing, that there are women who have actually theorized about it and written about it. So for me, that came as a big, big, big thing. So just to put it out there, that it is the book for me which opens up this entire vista. The book which also gives you a space which is liberal, where you can talk, where you can discuss. You begin from the book and you can take the discussion where you please. So lots of topics which might be taboo otherwise. Like we heard Preeti Das talking earlier. A lot of the stuff which people are not ready to talk about, but it's already out there. It's written in this book. So you can bring it up and talk about it. So for me, it's been very, very liberating.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing it. One more thing I just wanted to ask you, Preeti ma'am. As you mentioned about your experience at Kali, but you also have worked a lot for Northeast women and with the publishing house Zuban as well as an editor. So we would also like to hear about that because it is said that for women, the most important thing is when they are painfully connected, they give their best. As you truly mentioned that the women were very good when it was about seeding or farming or something like that, they were very good. It reminded me of a very good research paper which was published on mitigation and greenpreneurs. Greenpreneurs were the women who worked into the field of mitigation and they made truly wonders in the field of environment and sustainability, which is the very much important thing in today's time and in future time as well. So it is truly fair, ma'am. And one more thing, as ma'am mentioned about Virginia Woolf's book, The Room of One's Own, it has also been translated in Gujarati for our viewers if they wish to read. It is translated as Potano Ordo by Dr. Ranjana Harish. So those who are interested to read it, it can also be read in Gujarati as well. The translation is worth reading as well. Over to you, ma'am. Zuban.
Okay, so Zuban is a child of Kali for Women. Two publishing houses came out of Kali for Women. One was Zuban and the other one is called Women Unlimited. I used to work with Zuban after Kali. And yes, I mean, even while we were at Kali, we had started developing a list of women writers from the Northeast. The thing with Kali and also with Zuban later was that fiction that we published was only by women. We did not take any men writers in the fiction list. There were men writers, but only for non-fiction. And again, the northeast of India, which is again a very loose term to use for those 7-8 states which lie in the northeast of the country. The first exposure that I had was even earlier actually, because I used to work with the journal called The Book Review before I joined Kali. And the Book Review wanted to do a special issue on writers from the Northeast. And we couldn't think of a single writer. VO, are you listening? Couldn't think of even one writer, woman writer, except for Indira Goswami, you know, who was anyway in Delhi University heading that languages department, and we could not think of anybody else. So then I remember going to Guwahati and meeting lots of women there and then putting together this issue. But even then we had only Assamese writers. We didn't have writers from Mizoram or from Nagaland or from Manipur or anywhere else. Luckily for me, when we were at Zuban, I did get many chances to travel to the Northeast, to all the states actually, apart from Tripura, I think, and discovered lots of writers, many of whom became extremely good friends. And we managed to have a really eclectic list of women's writers from the Northeast. I mean, including doing Iram Sharmila's poems. I don't know how many of you have heard of Sharmila, but she was on that indefinite fast, I think for what, more than 10 years or so? 13 years?
16 years, okay.
16 years fighting against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And yeah, so she was truly a remarkable woman, and to talk about her in the land of Gandhi, is also something that we all need to actually be able to link together, because she fasted much as Gandhi had fasted through his life for so many, you know, critical issues. That was a book that also that Zuban had published, her poetry.
So there are many unsung heroes as well, as Preeti ji rightly mentioned about Sharmila ji. Those who have not heard the name, they can Google it. You will just see the picture of a lean lady with all the pipes and all the things in her, tubes and pipes, her nose and everywhere. And you can read from that, thanks to social media and all the search engine for that at least. Now moving further, we are having an exceptional travel person who has been to many countries and who has actually experienced the feeling of non-belongingness of many, and who has many things to share and say about it. It is about Dr. Pallavi Narayan, who is the author of Pramukh's Istanbul and The Self and the City, and it was published in 2022, and which is published to critical acclaim and received in the Journal of Mediterranean Studies, and a book discussion was organized at Kaur University, Istanbul as well, and her another edited anthology, Singapore at Home, Life Across Lines, was also launched in the Singapore Writers' Festival in the year 2021. So we would like to hear about both the books and about her journey, and what did she feel about the people who felt about, the feeling of non-belongingness. When we go home, we feel that, okay, we belong here. When you come to the festival of literature like here, it's Ahmedabad International Literature Festival, you feel that, okay, you meet the people, you get connected, and you have the feeling that we know the people, we belong here. Similarly, what about the people who do not get that much connected with the places and they have feeling of non-belongingness? Over to you. Dr. Pallavi ji.
Thank you so much, Dr. Payal. A great pleasure to be here and to hear about your journeys. Very inspirational, much younger to both of you, but yeah, I mean, really honored to share the stage. I've worked in India as well as Singapore in book publishing as well as academia. So I pursued my PhD along with full-time jobs in book publishing and changing countries and changing markets. So it's been interesting, it's been hard at times, it's had its own share of challenges. I think we've discussed the challenges that both of you have encountered on your journeys. But for me, really, as Dr. Payal mentioned, moving abroad, trying to find my own space in the literary landscape of a new country, of a new region, in a place where the literary landscape at that point in time was not as well developed as it was here, because JLF was already quite big here when I had left India. This was back in 2014. But Singapore Writers Festival over the last 8 or 9 years, over the last decade really, has become a huge deal now in Asia, bringing in some of the finest writers from across the world. So in my first couple of years, because I was from publishing, I was still working in publishing in Singapore. I was really grateful to have found a job in publishing in a very niche, society, because it's a very small country, right? It's an island nation. You can really go over it in 2 hours in a car. So, yeah. But it is a fantastic place for trying to build your own brand as a writer. At least at that point for me it was, and also to discover new ways of being, new ways of creating identities for myself. So I think in my first few years there, that's what I was trying to do, trying to find a space for myself. At some point I realized I couldn't quite fit into, the Singaporean writers' spaces, say. So I thought, let me talk to diaspora communities. I'll try to see what they also have to say, what kinds of challenges all of us have been facing. So I got together with some friends who were also interested in writing. We had facilitated some workshops, and I was always keen on the idea of home. So that's something I've been playing around with in both books. That's something that I think has I've never quite felt at home within India as well. So I think I think perhaps I've been trying to find that kind of, soul tribe, the kind of writer community or, publishers community. I always feel more at home, like over here, I'm very happy. Yeah. So, so going back to that experience, I think the first few years were spent trying to carve out some kind of identity, trying to get to know people, network, and so on. And then the next few years, I think we were just trying to figure out how to build our own identities as diaspora writers. So in conducting workshops on the concept of home and belonging, we discovered that home in Singapore is not merely a physical space, and I guess that's the same anywhere really in the world. But I'm talking about that space because homes there, physical spaces of homes are actually pretty small. They are really compressed because there's no space, literally, in that island. So we were trying to see, do we see home as objects we have brought from our home countries? Do we create new kinds of families? And I think that's becoming the trend in so many parts of the world now, within India as well, right? So I mean, it's all about creating communities. I mean, I'm quite new here in this city as well. I've just been here 2 months. I have quite a nice role at the university here. So finding this space has been, quite comforting for me personally, and the kinds of roles that I'm also involved in actually include, directorships of like setting up the university press, the writing program, and so on. So creating these spaces again for me is, it feels like I'm in a sense doing what I did in Singapore, initiating new things. So I think Ahmedabad really provides that kind of entrepreneurial space. True. And but going back to like the concepts of migration, perhaps, I worked a lot with migrant writers across Southeast Asia. These writers can be scholars, or they can be, people who have moved to work in to work in construction, to drive trucks and so on. So they've been living in dormitories. I've had writers publish with me in my Singapore book, for example. And their stories are extremely painful, and those stories are very universal as well, I feel. So in countries of the global south, particularly those with a history of colonization, I think we share a lot of parallels, and this can be true across the world. There's also a course that I teach, just by the way. So yeah, it's something that comes very naturally to me, but I think it's because of my lived experience as well that I feel it, kind of
Yes, Dr. Narayan, that's why we say that it is to be painfully connected. That is also something like that. We are having two ladies over here who are from the field of publication, Preeti Ji and Dr. Narayan. So we just wanted to ask both of you, one by one, that what were the challenges? Do you feel that there is any similarity after hearing the views of both of them? Do you feel that there was any similarity? One, you have experienced in India, and the other one you experienced and you observed. One you must have observed, ma'am, and you must have experienced and observed both, being an Indian and then to be settled in Singapore, and you have observed the people, your journey in diaspora. If you could just shed light over it, both of you, any one of you may begin with it.
Okay, so Preeti has said I should go first. So I think the challenges of detaching myself from my own identity, just to be an observer, to write about the experiences that I was going through, or to talk about them even in spaces or platforms like this one, in various literature festivals in Southeast Asia as well, to also talk to authors, because I was in publishing as well in Singapore as well as academia. So it's been a parallel journey for me in that sense as well. And I think that's been quite exciting. It's had its own set of struggles and challenges. I think talking about my migration, for instance, at different levels, as I just mentioned, speaking with scholars from across the world, because Singapore is a global hub, really. It's very, very cosmopolitan. So doing that, plus talking to people who were working at the, really building the homes there, building the society up from the ground level, literally the grassroots level, so to say. And speaking about their experiences, I think that sort of, created this sense of, there's no black and white, there are only shades of gray, and it's so nuanced. And even in a country which seems so far, it's a first world country, but it's absolutely, interesting to see those parallels with, let's say, Dubai, for instance, where, a lot of this labor is not really visible. So what is made visible, what is made invisible, I think India also is sort of dealing with it in its own ways. There's so much gentrification.
I think all country.
So yes, but different challenges. Same challenges, but approached in different ways,
Well, I think the basic challenge is just to get people to read. So for a publisher, all the many years that I was in publishing, we were just trying to get people to pick up the book, to read. So whether it comes from, having an attractive cover, or getting some great celebrity to give you a puff, that 2-line review on the top of the book cover, or trying to do events around the book, or trying to take the author to various literature festivals. It was just trying to get people to go to the bookshop and to buy a book and to read. Now I'm not in publishing directly in the same way. I'm a literary agent, so I still work with writers, but I'm not per se, going to office. But I have a cultural space now in Amritsar, in Punjab. Again, the point is to start to grow that community of readers and people who want to pick up a book. And you cannot imagine how difficult it is in Punjab. Or maybe you can, because they prefer having tangdi kebab. They are not interested in the book. But so the whole idea always has been to try to get people, that's the biggest challenge, to get people to read, to get people to start thinking, to get people to start debating and discussing things that concern you, things that concern your country, things that concern us as Punjabis in our own state. So because I am based in Amritsar, I have a house there, a house which we have now opened up to the public, and we have a lot of performances, we have discussions and debates around books, and we have talks there, we've had festivals there. Always the idea is that we open up a space where people come and talk. So, and unless you read and unless you at least open up your mind to the world of ideas that exists around you, how do you ever open up to the winds of change or to everything else that's going on around you? And also to be able to build these connections, to be able to link things across the world, because something that's happening, say, right now in Gaza, should be of concern to you. Why should it be of concern to you? So, I mean, maybe we need to just open our minds to many things. I mean, Ishmeet, for example, all your work on 84, it's very, very important, but often you need that distance between an event and when people start talking about it and when people start writing about it and thinking about it. So your book and a few others that came out actually force you to think, because somebody like me who grew up in Madhya Pradesh speaking Hindi, I had no idea about Punjab or its culture until I started living there. So it was very difficult to understand, and it was literally this new identity which was thrust upon you when 84 happened and when Sardars started to get killed. I had no idea I was a Sardar. So a lot of the times you need to think and you need to be often pointed in different directions.
As you rightly mentioned, Ishmeet ji would like to ask you about the literature of margins and the difficulties they feel or experience in getting published, because truly it is said that earlier our culture was not in writing or in scriptures, it was about Shruti and Smruti, and so was the case with margins as well. So was it difficult for them to get it published? Because whatever was there in Shruti and Smruti, it was just passing by generation to generation. It was never conserved. So what would you say about it, the struggle of margins for publication?
So I'll just park this question for a second and I'll respond to what Preeti ji just said first, and then I'll come to that. Of course, I mean, you know, for minorities particularly, it's very difficult to find publishers. And particularly, you know, this book, 84, when I did, and my query was about reading literature written around 1984. I found very interesting things in Punjabi, but I could not find a lot of things in English. One book, like you also mentioned, Indira Goswami. So Indira Goswami's book was translated in English. And then I realized it was already 2014. And not enough had been written on 1984. They were either journalistic writings or they were political writings. But I was looking for stories. I was looking for poems. I was looking for plays. And I thought that was not enough that I was asking for. But I was just, my query was I needed one little story to teach in the class. And believe me, I couldn't find. 2014, I found one novel, The Roll of Honor by Amandeep Sandhu. But after 2014, there were a series of works which did come out. So that was my trigger point that, okay, if there is, you know, if you don't find anything, you know, you do it yourself. So I thought I'm going to curate a book. I'll edit a book which will have these writings from 1984. Now comes the question of publishing. Can you believe it? I contacted 37 publishers for this book. I didn't want to self-publish it because I wanted this book to be available. I wanted people to read this book, and I couldn't have marketed it. So out of 37 publishers, I got a response from 30 publishers. No one wanted to publish. But they talked to me for hours together about what they had experienced in 1984, how sympathetic they were, quote unquote sympathetic, how bad they felt about it, but they could do nothing. If they could just publish this book, and we were not even in those times. But look how the fear continues. Right? Nobody wants to get into anything which has a political background to it. And I was trying to explain to them that, like Preeti also said that for Preeti, 84 was an awakening that she belonged to a Sikh community. We were never brought up like Sikhs, right? I come from, just like Dr. Pallavi, talks about her experience of migration. We were not brought up in Punjab or other places. All of us, many of us are Cosmo now. So we were brought up in Shimla, and we did have a small little episode, which was fine, where we were saved by our neighbors. We saw the best, example of friendship. So we never thought about it in the sense that, we were somebody else. But the moment you are being picked up, whether you have lived that identity or not, the moment you are picked up is the moment that, you are spotted as, belonging to a particular identity. That you can't, if people have watched Manto's film, he says, "Main utna Musalman to hoon ki main mara jaun." Right? And Manto kitne Musalman the, wo hum sabhi jante hain. Right? So that is what happens to minorities and the marginalized communities. Also, for the marginalized communities, I'll talk about another experience where I was trying to translate an Australian Aboriginal set of poems in Punjabi. So I talked to a friend of mine who was a literary agent, and he said, "Come on, are you kidding me? Who's going to read Australian Aborigine poems in Punjabi?" Right? So how do margins reach out to others? That's a bigger thing. So poetry, he said poetry doesn't sell otherwise. And you're asking us to sell, a translated poetry book, and that also of Aborigines from Australia. What connect do Indians have with them? Right? We do have connects. It's not we don't have. My poetry writing about 84 actually was inspired by this Aboriginal book. So margins do have this kind of a struggle where, they do not find publishers easily. And even the publishers don't want to kind of, put their hand into something which is a bit more political or, which is addressing conflict per se. So, Preeti, would you like to add to something about publishing houses and how they work around this?
I don't know who these 37 were, because you definitely didn't come probably to the right one.
Finally to the right one. The speaking tiger did it,
But I'm interested in knowing about those 7 who, she said 30 said no. So I'm more interested in know about those 7.
So the 7, those were left. One was Speaking Tiger, who did the book. One was a Sikh publishing house from UK who kept it on hold that if you don't get anybody else, come to me, right? And the remaining never responded.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, and you do need to be very brave and basically have a backbone. The publisher needs to have a backbone, and also to be able to stand up to any other thing that, repercussions or things that might happen. A case in point very recently was The Tribal Will Not Dance, that particular book which got panned and which got taken out of university syllabi and so on. So, but the publisher has stood strong. Again, it is Speaking Tiger. He stood strong by the writer of the book, as well as taken him on for 2 other books after that. Another case in point with Speaking Tiger was Wendy Doniger's Hinduism, which I think was earlier published by Penguin and
Banned again.
yeah, and then he bought the rights, and it is still going strong. So I think that's important also. You need somebody who believes in your work and believes in the book itself.
So I just wanted to, just say that I just wanted to say that publishers are tastemakers. So having worked with Penguin and Macmillan, Routledge, and several other publishers, I feel that commissioning books is also something that can be very tricky. It's also something that commissioning editors don't always have a sort of handle on in terms of how much can they protect the author, how much are they willing to challenge their own, seniors in the management of the publishing houses to be, take on something which can be controversial. So just providing that alternate view to what my, colleagues
If there are
here
any
have said.
questions, please raise your hands. And yes, I think over there.
Yes, I have a question for Ishmeet ma'am. Ma'am talked about margin and how their voice is not being taken seriously. Now, as they are writing in their, kind of regional languages, their voice is not coming out nationally or internationally. So in that case, don't we think that translators are the, the complete mediator in recognizing their voices and letting others know what they are feeling? Just like publishing houses are not much interested in publishing their books, the same case is with translators. Who is gonna translate them? That is also one of the major issue, I guess.
Truly said, Ashish. I mean, that is very true, that most of these writings are in regional languages. And of course, I mean, I think you, in your head, it must be Professor Gugi wa Thiong'o who talks about the power of translation, because you really cannot write in another's language to depict your culture. You have to write in your own language. And it's the translation that, bridges the gap, and therefore translation is extremely, extremely important. Who will translate? The onus finally falls on the community itself. So the idea is that, of course, if others can, they should definitely come up. But we also see, with a pinch of salt, I bring this forward, we also see that there is a certain kind of community politics at work, because once the writers of a particular community come up, they don't want the non-community people to work in their areas, right? And therefore, those who do not belong to the community, they also, not want to translate, or they do not want to engage with those texts. So somewhere, the self-introspection is important for, the writers, and this is a problem of the elitist, basically, right? But the answer to this, I mean, there's no set answer, but the answer, if there is, it is like we have to take the onus of our own literatures and our works ourselves, right? So build your communities in a way where they are able to translate, they're able to promote, they're able to write, they're able to publish.
Anybody else? We can take one more question, not after that.
No.
The problem is that of money. In Indian culture, I find that only the writer themselves have to contribute for the publication. So that is the important. Where is the solution for it? I have written about 33 books and on my leaving to all on my own contribution.
I think on concluding line, I would like to say that it's not only about margins or marginalized. The reader community, the readers community itself is in margin group nowadays, because it has always been, but now it is, I guess, it is more squeezed. And earlier it used to be, I mean, there were people who had choice for reading. They would go for thrillers, they would go for suspense, or they would go for autobiography. Now there are, I mean, readers are compromised, and now our fight is not against what to read or choose to read. It is about phone, gadgets, and a book. So that's why it is a great challenge for publication houses as well, and for the writers as well. What is to be written that would be read by the youth or this Gen Z, because who are more interested in watching the reels instead of reading a book. So if the book can be now audiobooks and all the new concepts are launching, so along with that, if there is some new change which can be brought, this generation will also be interested into reading, and they'll also be friend with books as well. And then as all the questions of publications, of reading, and of such, the aim of such festivals, that is Ahmedabad International Literature Festival, consecutively 8th year it has been entered. It would be solved if we really enter into something which would come with solution and not only with dialogues. And with that note, I think we would like to conclude over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ishmeet ma'am. Thank you, Preeti ma'am. Thank you, Pallavi ma'am, for such a captivating session. I'm sure everyone present here is so delighted with your speech. I would like Uma Shankar sir to felicitate the guests with a memento.
So we have Pallavi Narayan ma'am here, and she's an associate professor at Ahmedabad University. And I just want to know your experience, ma'am. How are you enjoying the AILF?
Sure. Hi, thanks very much. I think AILF at this point for me is like how JLF, Jaipur Lit Fest, used to be in the early years, so that you can walk around, talk to writers, actually have that experience of conversing with them, which you don't get as these festivals become bigger and bigger. So yeah, I think right now it's at a very nice space. I've had a great experience so far. Our moderator has been so nice. I have another panel tomorrow. We have had really great panelists as well, and the dances have been really nice. I think that's been something I've greatly enjoyed. I also dance myself, classical. So for me, this has been a really great experience so far. Thank you.
So we're at the 8th edition of Ahmedabad Literature Festival, and I would like to ask Miss Preeti to say a few words about how our experience has been at the festival.
Okay. I've really enjoyed coming to Ahmedabad. It's my first trip here, and the fact that I'm at the Ahmedabad International Literature Festival is really wonderful because I've had two really great sessions. Audience has been very engaged, listening, asking good questions, and I think both the sessions have gone really well. I'm also amazed at the level of all the sessions that I've attended today. So it's really been a very, very good experience. And of course, I've done many literature festivals, including Jaipur and Bangalore and all sorts of them, but I've enjoyed being here. Apart from that, of course, Ahmedabad is a beautiful city, and since it's my first time, I've seen the Gandhi Ashram and Atal Bridge and a couple of other things, which I've really enjoyed doing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I'm here at AILF with Payal ma'am, and I really want to ask a question. How are you enjoying AILF, ma'am?
Well, I would like to say that it is truly a treat to eyes, ears, and the soul itself. Yesterday it was a beautiful performance by Kazakhstan, belly dance, and all beautiful artists. They performed so well, as I truly said that it was treat to eyes and treat to ears, because there are very good speakers who are coming from different places. Right now the session on children's literature is going on. Earlier it was a session about marginals, about how society, culture and literature is connected. Earlier to it was Honorable Mr. Justice S.K. Nandaji, a retired IAS officer, and very good speakers who talked about human development and literature. So it is the 8th edition of AILF, and it is truly very useful that consecutively on the 8th year it is arranging such programs, which is truly helpful for the next generation as well and for the people of this generation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.